Several motorcycle gangs are worldwide, but the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is among the most recognizable. The motorcycle club was started in 1948 by Otto Friedli in Fontana, California. Over time, the biker gang went from being a small operation to a multinational conglomerate. They've also had numerous run-ins with police, many of whom have made it clear they suspect the gang of criminal behavior. Hells Angels typically consist of Caucasian males who ride the stereotypically infamous Harley-Davidson motorcycles. All club members have colorful aliases outside of their legal names. Accepting this exclusive club is challenging. Newcomers must endure a rigorous screening and introduction procedure. Members who voluntarily leave the organization are expected to return any club apparel with the Death Head logo or corporate name. Some Hells Angels chapters have clubhouses, but most members meet up in bars and take group rides to nearby attractions instead. Several club members have been recognized by authorities as involved in criminal activity, such as drug dealing, racketeering, and physical violence. Many Hells Angels have gone to jail in the past, despite the club's prominence and power, because many of their members have run afoul of the law. Number 10. Christian Rufino. Brewster's Hells Angel Motorcycle Club has officially accepted Christian Rufino as a full-fledged member of their organization. He was taken into custody by the Cranston Police Department for being a convicted criminal possessing a handgun. In August 2011, Rufino, 42 years old at the time, entered a guilty plea to one count of being a convicted criminal possessing a firearm. It all started in December 2009 when a police officer in Cranston pulled Rufino up for a traffic violation. During the encounter, the officer noticed that Rufino was under the influence of drugs. When he inspected Rufino's vehicle, he found a loaded revolver, additional ammunition, and a little bag that contained an illicit narcotic. All of these items were found in the exact location. In 1995, Rufino was found guilty of assault and battery with a deadly weapon. In 1998, he was found guilty of armed robbery to take someone's life in New Bedford. And in 1990, he was found guilty of robbing a bank in Maine via force, violence, and intimidation. According to the Justice Department, the investigation into his case was carried out by the police in Cranston, Rhode Island, as well as by officers who were attached to the FBI's Safe Street Task Force. A sentence of armed career criminal was handed down to Rufino by Judge John J. McConnell of the United States District Court during the sentencing hearing. According to the prosecution, he admitted to being a part of the New York chapter of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. Because convicts are prohibited from possessing firearms under the law, Rufino was sentenced to 15 years in jail for violating this statute. The prosecution also disclosed that Rufino was initially pulled over for speeding on Route 95 and that this was the reason for the stop. As a direct consequence of his flagrant contempt for the regulations, Rufino was sent back to jail. But this time he served a significantly more severe sentence. Number 9. Brian Shane Henson, Merced native. Brian Shane Henson is a Hells Angel outlaw motorcycle gang member. Henson calls Merced his home. According to court documents from the beginning of 2017, the 42-year-old Henson was in the process of becoming a member of the Merced chapter of the club. At the same time, he allegedly discussed a contract to sell a significant number of illicit substances in exchange for 20 firearms that had been stolen. Henson was unaware they had struck a deal with an undercover agent working for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF. Henson and his co-defendant, Hussein Fawaz Eltareb, who was a full-patch member of the Hells Angel Club, drove for 7 hours from Merced to Needles, California, to meet up with the undercover agent after negotiating a deal for over a week with the agent. Eltareb was also a member of the Hells Angel Club. When they got to Needles, Henson gave the narcotics to the waiting agent. After that, he took the firearms he had been holding and stowed them away in the trunk of Eltareb's vehicle. Immediately after the encounter, law enforcement agents detained Henson and Eltareb for questioning. During the investigation that led to his apprehension, the authorities discovered and seized a loaded pistol concealed in the car near the driver's seat. Henson entered a guilty plea in October of 2017, admitting to the charges of trafficking in narcotics and possessing guns intending to commit a trafficking felony. The ATF's field office in Flagstaff, Arizona, located in Arizona, was the one to conduct the investigation. They were helped in their research by the Coconino County Narcotics Task Force, the Mojave County General Narcotics Task Force, and the California Highway Patrol. Following his guilty plea, Henson was required to serve a minimum obligatory term of 180 months in a federal correctional facility. El-Tareb, 27 at the time, was found guilty of conspiracy to distribute illegal substances in possession of a pistol in furtherance of narcotics trafficking by Judge Bernal, who rendered her verdict following a bench trial later in December. El-Tareb was also given a mandatory minimum of 180 months in a federal correctional facility. Number 8. Stephen Sanders. In the past, Stephen Sanders served as the president of a local chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. In 2013, Stephen was given a prison term ranging from 25 years to life. He was convicted of multiple felonies, including soliciting and kidnapping, and sentenced to prison. According to the prosecution, Sanders, who was 41 years old at the time of the incident, admitted that he was responsible for kidnapping 2 people for the benefit of a criminal street gang. While Sanders's case was being heard in court, he also participated in a plot to have witnesses and law enforcement officers connected to the claim assaulted. In all honesty, he intended to kill both of them. Over the previous few years, the district attorney's office has brought charges against him in several other pending cases. In 2012, he was found guilty of solicitation to take someone's life, robbery, and assault with force, most likely to cause serious bodily injury. These charges were brought against him in connection with an incident in 2012. Sanders entered guilty pleas to counts of assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, and membership in a criminal organization in April and June 2013. Sanders motioned to withdraw his guilty plea before being sentenced, but the San Diego Superior Court judge dismissed his request. Sanders was ultimately sentenced. His attempt to have his witnesses in connection with an ongoing kidnapping and torture case injured considerably decreases his chances of receiving a sentence that is more lenient than it otherwise would have been. Sanders used the opportunity to address the court during his sentence and voice his uncertainty about his circumstances. He said he was pressured to enter a guilty plea, since he stood to receive a significant term if he was found guilty after the trial. Sanders refused to recognize that the Hells Angels were a criminal street gang, even though he had admitted this fact on record. Additionally, his attorney requested that his guilty plea be withdrawn, but the move was not granted. The district prosecutor claims that Sanders's sentencing is a significant success for law enforcement. When discussing the case of Sanders, the district attorney stated that over the past few years, the defendant had been involved in a string of violent crimes committed against the inhabitants of San Diego. As he went through the legal process for a case involving kidnapping and mayhem, he plotted the deaths of those who would play important roles in the case against him. Number 7. Dean Daniel Kelsey. Dean Kelsey is a member of the Hells Angels and is responsible for the death of a guy in Dartmouth who was not accountable for his actions. In October of 2000, Kelsey assaulted Sean Simmons, a resident of Lower Sackville who was 31 years old and a father of 2 children. The occurrence occurred in the building's foyer on Trinity Avenue, where apartments are located. Kelsey and 3 other people were arrested and charged in connection with the fatal incident. Due to his crimes in March of 2003, he was sentenced to life in prison. Following an appeal, the severity of the charge was reduced to that of the 2nd degree. In 2001, law enforcement officials detained Kelsey, who has been incarcerated continuously since then. Neil Smith and Wayne James, 2 other men who were engaged in the case, were both sentenced to life in prison for their participation in the death of Simon. In the early 1990s, it was rumored that Simon had an affair with the mistress of a Hells Angels who was active in the Halifax chapter. On the orders of a Hells Angels member of the Hells Angels chapter, ordered that the group kill Simon. Kelsey's sentence was raised in 2008 and again in 2015 for assaulting fellow inmates. Even though he was convicted of conspiracy to destroy someone's life and 1st degree, the increases occurred because of Kelsey's behavior toward other inmates. Neil Smith, a member of the Hells Angels, was the one who placed the hit order. Unfortunately, Kelsey was given parole in 2019, despite the emotional protest of both the relatives of the victims and the families of other victims, as well as the prosecution. Kelsey was finally released from prison after serving a sentence of 18 years, much to the dismay of the people he had wronged. The members of Simon's family were also afraid that the parole board might have approved Kelsey's release to fulfill some sort of quota requirement. Several crimes, including assault, causing bodily harm, uttering threats, mischief, robbery, obstruction of a peace officer, theft, and narcotics trafficking, were among Kelsey's previous convictions. The fact that he assaulted other inmates and continued to misbehave while incarcerated proves he does not regret his behavior. Number 6. Norm Cox and Rob Thomas. Norm Cox and Robert Leonard Thomas were fully patched Hells Angels from the Kahlua chapter. In June 2011, the two guys and 4 others murdered Diane Phillips. Phillips's age at death was 51 years old. When tragedy struck, he had been trying to mediate a dispute between his 2 sons and 2 other teens who were members of the Hells Angel Biker Club. His son saw the savage assault. Phillips took a blow to the head with a baseball bat and a hammer, delivered by Thomas and Cox. The prosecution claims that one of the 4 suspected Hells Angels implicated in Phillips's death was motivated to participate in the attack because of his gang affiliations. In his closing arguments, Crown Counsel Joe Bello stated that the defendant's hatred for Phillips before the June 2011 incident was clearly shown. For killing Phillips, both Cox and Thomas received life sentences in prison with no chance of parole. Since they received time off for being in pre-sentence incarceration, their punishment was reduced to 12 years. The Associate Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of British Columbia stated this was a brutal and determined attack with weapons on an unarmed man while delivering the punishment. It was just attempting to settle a disagreement. In her victim impact statement, Phillips's wife Jeannie described her husband as a warm-hearted presence who had left a palpable void in their family. Her account was that he had been forcibly removed from their life. Widow said she had a heart attack after seeing her husband's lifeless, unrecognizable body in the hospital. This was the crux of why the crime was so pointless to her. How these folks become part of our life is a complete mystery. Outside of Kelowna, Phillips and his sons Cody and Kalen were challenged by a gang that included Thomas and Cox on a public highway. Thomas climbed out of the back of a pickup with a baseball bat in one hand and a ball-peen hammer in the other. He was angry and told Phillips how dare he cross the Hells Angels. After Norman and Rob had assaulted Phillips, the 4 Hells Angels allies, Robert Cox, now Norman Cox's father, Daniel and Matthew McRae, and Anson Shell allegedly kicked him while he was on the ground. Although the matter remains before the courts, I hope these guilty pleas will bring closure to those who cared for Diane Phillips, said the superintendent of the Kelowna RCMP after the sentencing. Number 5. Zane Para Wallace. Wallace is a prospective member of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. He is responsible for the murder of a woman who was raising 2 children. Jasmine Tamara Wilson, who was 30 years old at the time of her death, passed away in August 2019 at Wellington Hospital. When she was dumped by an unknown person in front of the Wanganui Hospital Emergency Department a few days earlier, she was found outside the building unconscious and gravely damaged. When Wallace phoned his father for assistance, Wallace's father was the one who found Jasmine's body after Wallace had called him. His mother, Leanne, his father, Steve, and his sister Stevie Lee Wallace were all found guilty and jailed for their roles in the attempt to obstruct justice in the case of Jasmine Wallace. For Zane to receive his punishment from Justice Francis Cook of the High Court in Wanganui, he was hauled before the court. He was being investigated for several different alleged misdeeds. Because Jasmine had been subjected to violence by her then-partner Zane for a considerable time before her passing, her family and friends have expressed that they are all tortured with remorse over her death. According to one of her sisters, the loss of Jasmine has created a void in their family's hearts that can never be filled. Several members of Jasmine's family testified in court about the disbelief, anguish they are still experiencing even years after their relative's passing. They addressed Zane, who had been convicted of murdering Jasmine and received a life sentence with a mandatory minimum of 15 years and 6 months in jail due to his actions. Zane pleaded guilty to a wide variety of other counts, including assaulting other people and sending death threats to the victim's family. Neil Forlong, a detective senior sergeant, was quoted in a news publication as saying that Jasmine's injuries were among the most severe he had ever seen. Wallace entered a guilty plea before he was scheduled for a retrial because his initial trial had concluded in May 2021 due to the introduction of new medical evidence. Earlier, he had confessed to attacking Wilson multiple times, including once at the Wanganui Hells Angels clubhouse in May 2019. While he was being carried into the courthouse cells, a fight broke out between the families of Wilson and Wallace in the courtroom gallery. While the police officers attempted to keep the two families apart, members of Jasmine's family were heard repeatedly telling Wallace that he should burn in hell. Wallace had a protracted history of engaging in violent behavior. He had a history of convictions for abusing former partners dating back to 2014, including one of those convictions. In the 9 months following Jasmine's passing, he attacked her multiple times. The quarrel between them started the episode and ultimately led to her death. After the fight, he assaulted her, but she was still alive. The following day, he attacked her once more, and this time she was unable to defend herself, and she died as a result. Number 4. David Giles. The Hells Angels also counted David Giles among their ranks. In 2017, he received an extremely lengthy prison term of 18 years. Members of the notorious biker gang in British Columbia are frequently associated with criminal activity. Hence, this term ranks among the longest ever handed down to gang members. His trial took place over 5 years after he was accused of being the ringleader in a plot to import half a ton of an illicit chemical. Giles, being 66 years old, was sickly and frail. While the BC Supreme Court Justice read her reasons for the 18-year sentence, he battled for air in the cell. Ross stated, "I have concluded that the fit sentence is 18 years, taking into consideration the nature of his transaction, the quantity of the substance involved, the intention for it to be an ongoing venture," Mr. Giles told, "and Mr. Giles's circumstances." For the nearly 7 years Giles spent in pretrial detention, she credited him with almost 7. A total of 11 years and 1 month in prison was thus necessary to thoroughly punish him. A smuggling arrangement orchestrated by Giles and his friend Kevin Van Kalkeren in 2012, with police masquerading as South American suppliers, resulted in Giles and Van Kalkeren being convicted of conspiracy to import an illicit substance and traffic for trafficking that previous fall. Van Kalkeren entered a guilty plea on the day of his trial, and he was given a 16-year term. After months of discussions, police finally arrested Giles and Van Kalkeren when they transported 200 kilograms of drugs to a warehouse in Burnaby and paid a $4 million down payment. They were apprehended alongside 6 others. Paul Gill, Giles's attorney, asked for a shorter sentence because his client's liver illness was so advanced that he needed a transplant immediately. He said that Van Kalkeren was the actual head of the plot and that he was the one who provided the funding and introduced Giles to the undercover operation. Although Judge Ross acknowledged that Giles's condition should be considered, she did not buy the defense's contention that he had been paying attention to Van Kalkeren as the latter arranged for the massive shipment. Mr. Van Kalkeren reportedly treated Mr. Giles as an equal once he was brought into the conspiracy, and according to Ross, Mr. Giles acted like an equal once he was recruited. Former Hells Angels Kilawano Chapter Vice President Giles said in court that he aimed to earn 500 kilograms every 3 months. The terms market, distribution, and buyers appeared frequently in his remarks. Chris Greenwood, the prosecutor, had recommended 18 to 20 years in prison for the frail, balding Hells Angel. He claimed that the first chats showed that Giles had been a critical figure in the industry for many years. Number 3. Neil Cantrell and his gang. Neil Cantrell was the former biker club president and mastermind of an extortion scheme in 2016. He and his 38-year-old son Stephen and fellow Hells Angel Robert Lowry murdered a friend. The gang boss in Alberta and his men abducted and beat up their former partner from British Columbia since the latter had lost interest in cultivating illegal marijuana. Neil, 62 at the time, was found to be the mastermind behind the extortion scheme by Justice Ward Branch of the Supreme Court of British Columbia. The court also said that he and his co-defendant got off too quickly. In 2020, all three individuals were found guilty of kidnapping, extortion, aggravated assault, and overcoming resistance in connection with the brutal attack on former Hope man for Cantrell Robert Hoole more than a decade prior. Hoole went to Edmonton in December 2014 to tell his co-conspirators that he was leaving the illegal enterprise. He also extended an offer of cultivation tools to Cantrell. There was silence between Hoole and Neal until July 2016, when Hoole reached out to Neal to set up a meeting. The next day, Hoole found himself in a pullout next to a road in the Hope area. It was here when he was attacked and severely beaten. When they took him back to his residence, the three inmates attempted to coerce Hoole into signing over the house. Hoole was injured, cuts, broken bones, and a burn to the forehead before the RCMP officers arrived and took him to the hospital. After the violent attack, he needed to go into the witness protection program to recover. Hoole reportedly fled to safety after Judge Branch said his life was in danger. Branch added that a report submitted during Cantrell's sentence hearing demonstrated that Cantrell felt no remorse. Branch included an excerpt from the information in which the man said he was absolutely due money. He was undoubtedly pursuing his legal entitlements. Given a 10-year prison term, Neal sat quietly and attentively through his sentencing hearing. He showed no emotion and gave the impression of having no remorse for his actions. Number 2. Emery Martin. The Pit is the nickname that has been given to Emery Martin throughout his service as a member of Hell's Angels. He is a veteran of the vicious and lethal biker conflict in Quebec. He was given a term for his involvement in the drug trade. More than 20 years of Martin's 63 total years on Earth have been spent behind bars. He has been a member of Hell's Angels for more than 25 years at this point. Martin has stated that he was a member of the Montreal branch when he first launched his network of drug dealers. However, in November 2016, he moved his membership to the New Brunswick Nomad branch. He was found guilty of being a top executive in a big interprovincial drugs ring and received his sentence in October 2021. In 2018, he was one of numerous people who were arrested as part of Project J Thunderstruck, an investigation into high-scale bulk trafficking that was led by the RCMP and took place in New Brunswick and Quebec. According to the court, had Martin not been involved, no unlawful chemicals would have been available for sale. The judge noted in her decision that the defendant was a New Brunswick Hells Angels member. The power to direct trafficking inside the territory he commanded was bestowed upon him by Nomad. Without Mr. Martin's authorization, the network would not have been able to conduct business within its jurisdiction. After extensive pretrial hearings, Martin was supposed to face a trial that would have lasted for 4 months. However, the problem was cancelled, and Martin eventually reached a plea bargain. Martin had agreed with the prosecutor to plead guilty to 2 of the 5 allegations against him: conspiracy to engage in illegal activity and trafficking to advance the goals of a criminal organization. He was a liaison between the Quebec-based supplier of unseized drug bricks and the New Brunswick-based traffickers commanded by Marcel Friot. He was responsible for facilitating the transaction. In exchange for allowing Friot and his associates to sell in northeastern New Brunswick, he was paid a tax on everything these individuals sold. Martin did not have to put in much effort to earn his money. He then bestowed his blessings onto the buyers and vendors before introducing them to one another. Additionally, he was responsible for resolving various issues that arose in connection with the deliveries. They all communicated with one another using phones with encryption. The group moved 96 kilograms of illegal narcotics between May 2016 and July 2017. Martin was meant to serve an 8-year sentence, but LeBlanc reduced Martin's time served in jail by 6 months because of an assault event that occurred while Martin was incarcerated. Number 1. Adam Lee Hall. One of the most infamous members of the Hells Angel Club is a man by the name of Adam Lee Hall. In August 2011, Hall was one of the 3 men arrested and charged with the deaths of 3 people who had been found in Berkshire County. David Glasser, the primary victim, was expected to provide testimony against Hall. At that time, Glasser, his roommate Edward Frampton, and their mutual buddy Robert Chadwell vanished without a trace. The three males were all from the town of Pittsfield. During the trial, the prosecutors let it slip that Hall was a high-ranking neighborhood Hells Angels chapter member. He, together with David Schall of North Adams and Caius Vias of Pittsfield, kidnapped the three victims from Frampton's home and then murdered all of them. The remains of the three were discovered in Beckett around 2 weeks after they had been reported missing. The three defendants in the case each had their trial. During the test, the jury reached a guilty verdict for Adam, and the judge then handed down a sentence of 3 consecutive life sentences. According to Kinder, the case displayed depravity and disrespect for human dignity above his previous experiences. He also commented on how cruelly Hall and his associates treated David Glasser, as well as that Frampton and Chadwell were singled out for their participation in the kidnapping of Glasser only because they were present when the victim was taken. In addition to the 3 life sentences, Judge Kinder issued 2 additional terms that must be served consecutively. The sentence for armed robbery can range from 12 to 15 years, and the punishment for kidnapping can range from 8 to 10 years. For a conviction of first-degree murder, the obligatory minimum sentence is life in prison without the possibility of parole. After listening to testimony for a total of 3 weeks and deliberating for around 17 hours, the jury in the Superior Court found Hall guilty of all 3 murders, as well as 12 more charges. Hall made Glasser a particular target because of the mental handicap he suffered from, and the fact that he was defenseless. The families of the people who were killed stated that Hall deserved the severe penalty that he got. He did not exhibit any evidence of remorse at any point during the trial or the punishment process. Thanks for watching. If you want more videos like this one, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel to never miss out on any of our videos.